welcome to another episode of Panel on Panels, the podcast about all things comics and comics related. I'm your host, John Campbell. Joining me, as always, my co-host, Mike Gergoni.
Greetings.
Mr. Donovan Eilert.
Hi, everybody. How's it going?
Oh, folks, we got a good one for you today. We have another guest on the show. It's somebody whose name has been mentioned a lot on this show. We're frequently praising her work, so we're very excited to welcome Colleen Coover to the show.
Hi, guys.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
All right.
Perfect. All right. Off to a good start there.
I don't know what we would have done had you said, like,
Oh,
miserable.
Man, I'm really bummed
Yeah,
out.
exactly. I got evicted. Or my cat got shot or something. I don't know. Like,
Shot?
Hey, it's a rough city. It's a rough city.
It's a cat-shooting city. I don't know. You never know.
That's what they say. Portland is the cat shooting capital of the United States. I don't think so.
I don't know.
I don't
I
have
re-
a
I don't
pet. I have a plant. I have a house plant.
Does your houseplant have a name? Okay.
That's the thing about houseplants. They bounce back pretty good if they get shot.
Yeah, that's.
I think it'll be fine.
We're not the plant-shooting city, though.
No.
No.
That'd be Austin.
Yeah, it'd be Austin, yeah. Colleen, thank you for coming on the show. You are a comic book artist.
I am.
And which is awesome. We've talked about your work on the show. Like I said, for those who have listened to it, we've talked about particularly Bandette quite a bit.
And Gingerbread Girl.
And Gingerbread Girls also come up as
Awesome.
well. So this being a comic book podcast, we are very interested always in people's origins.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the questions I always like to start with is do you remember the comic that specifically clicked you into the medium?
I don't.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the first time this happened. This is interesting.
No, it would be impossible. I was born in 1969.
Mm-hmm.
My older sister was 7 years older than me. Our grandmother at the time was working at either a drugstore or a five and dime or some combination of those two. She would bring home the stripped comics from the drugstore, from the newsstand. So the comics that had the cover torn off
Right.
and that sent back to the distributor for credit. And so we had, by the time I was born, we had this pile of coverless comics. My older sister liked horror comics more. She had a lot of like House of Mystery or whatever was coming out from DC.
Tomb of Dracula.
Yeah, probably. And then I would read more like Archie and Harvey. We also had some random like superhero comics. I know that we had one of those thick DC famous firsts. So I knew from basically the womb.
Oh, wow.
what all the origins of the DC characters were, because that covered like the first appearance of Superman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, the Silver Age, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, and
Oh, wow.
Batman.
Very
So,
cool.
You know, it was covered. I had the basic knowledge.
This was covered.
It was on. And then, like, I had a subscription to Spidey Super Stories in the 70s, and so I really grew up.
So it was always
learning
comics
to
for you.
read. Yeah, on comics.
Very cool, because I mean we've had different people come on and talk about it and coming to them later or whatever it seems like. But it was, and so was there ever like a point where it wavered the comics fandom or anything?
A little bit in high school because I got into romance novels.
Oh,
in
okay.
High school. But that was mostly a financial thing because I didn't have any money. Although that is also when I started reading like ElfQuest and Love and Rockets.
Nice.
Oh, great, yeah.
So that like, and I think like a lot of people my age in the 40s or whatever, pretty much those are two of the formative comics of the 80s.
Oh, definitely.
Because you know you see those and excuse me, you see those and you see how the styles of the past can be applied to something new for the future. And I know that like my connection to Los Bros Hernandez is informed by our mutual influence by Archie or Harvey. I know that for a fact. I remember when the Hernandez brothers were asked what their influential comics were. Like Gilbert listed some individual Harvey comics, like, you know, Casper the Spooky Ghost or Casper the Friendly Ghost number 11 from 1965 or whatever like that.
Wow.
It was like, He knows exactly what comics he had as a kid.
Yeah, I love when people can do that. We always ask people about the origins, and I always ask about the comics. And some people are able to go, oh, and then like Trevor Dodge was like, oh, it's Daredevil number 146. That
this is the cover. This is where I was. This is what was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
I do remember sitting under a hairdryer, like one of those old bonnet style ones, and my mom put a comic in my hands, and it was one of my sister's horror comics, and it freaked me out.
So like you have memory of being traumatized by one of these comics.
Yeah, and I'm fine. I'm fine.
Yeah, and then at the same time you were growing up reading these comics, were you also always drawing? And
I doodled a lot. I didn't really start drawing formally for comics. I tried it a little bit in high school. Like I had this story that I was drawing about some punk rockers, and I don't even remember.
Don't remember the title?
Story was or anything, and it was all I don't think I ever had a title. I remember there used to be a postcard of these two punk rockers in London that was around, and I like based two of my characters on them. Like the girl had like big pink hair, and the guy had like big blonde hair.
Everyone had big hair back then.
Yeah.
sure, yeah,
But they were punkers.
right.
Big with spikes.
Yeah, with spikes, and it was watercolored. Bad idea, by the way. A lot of work, and I had no story. And it didn't. I didn't really start doing comics until I met my husband now, Paul Tobin, who had been writing some comics in the early '90s for Caliber Press. Is it Caliber Press? No. Yes.
Okay.
Anyway, he was doing like The Fringe was one of their first titles with Philip Hester.
Okay.
Way back before Philip started doing like DC stuff.
Right.
And doing little odds and ends here and there. Otherwise, in like the sort of black and white comics boom of the early '90s. And then we were running a comic book shop through the '90s and sort of working at getting into making comics. And I did some comics with him, and we like worked on some stuff that like never got published and never will be published. And that's when I started like understanding how to tell stories.
Sure.
Because I was working with a writer.
Right.
And then I started doing Small Favors, which was my first solo.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk
Actual
about that
thing.
for sure, because
Yeah.
that was, and that got you a lot of attention as well.
Well, yeah, and it also taught me how to do my job.
Okay.
You know, that was like on the job training right
Yeah.
there.
Because, that's the thing. You don't have any formal art training?
Not really. I mean, I took classes. I took drawing classes.
Sure.
I never took any cartooning classes because there wasn't really such a thing where I was. I mean,
And where was that?
that was in Iowa.
Okay.
So I lived in Iowa City, Iowa, and I went to the University of Iowa.
It's a lot of Iowa.
That's a lot of Iowa. Yeah. It's the best place to live in Iowa, in my opinion, but yeah. It is unambiguously in Iowa.
don't hide
So, I mean, there was the Kubert School, but you had to have, like, a mint to go to Kubert
Sure,
School.
yeah.
And even so, there's a lot to be said for, like I say, on the job.
Oh yeah, you got to do the work. It's not,
Yeah.
I mean, even if you're going to school, you have to draw it. So I mean,
Right.
A little
And
certificate saying that you can is all well and good, but then you get to the job. It's like, can you do the job?
that's how I've always felt about a lot of the artistic kind of things like that, where it's
Right.
like, like I went to film school. That doesn't mean I'm directing. Yeah, it wasn't like, here's my diploma, now let me direct this movie. Yeah, I'm here.
Here I am.
Yeah.
And it helps that, as I was doing this, I was living with this terrific writer.
Oh yeah.
Who is also a really harsh critic.
That's a good thing, though.
It's fantastic. So he Paul just never let me slouch, and I'm really grateful for that. And then after 8 issues of Small Favors, we Paul and I did Banana Sunday, which was published by Oni Press.
Oh, yes.
And while we were creating that, we moved here to Portland. And then we worked on Gingerbread Girl while we both started getting work for hire from Marvel Comics.
That's right. Yeah.
And then everything sort of took off from there.
So let's take that back a little bit.
right.
Where did you meet Paul?
I met him sort of through a mutual friend that I knew from the theater department.
Okay.
And he was friends with this guy, and I knew this guy. And
Donovan, that's how you and I met.
That's right.
You knew this guy, and he knew this
We knew
guy.
this guy
theater department.
in a theater department.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We ended up a little differently than you Paul, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Hosting a podcast is a lot like a marriage, I feel like.
Right.
There's a lot more microphones involved.
Yeah. A lot of paperwork.
But also, he was running a comic book shop. He was running the comic book shop in Iowa City.
It was the comic book shop.
There were two eventually. We were the better one.
Oh yeah, of course.
But yeah, he was like the manager, and it was like owned by this old hippie guy. But,
Sounds right.
Yeah, and it was like in this like one of those places that's like unique to a city that you know, there's always like this little row of shops that shouldn't really be there.
Oh, sure, yeah.
For fire reasons or whatever.
And it's where every comic book shop belongs.
Yeah. So we have a real fondness for that sort of comic shop. But,
Yeah.
you know, so he was working there, and I was like, hey, I'll introduce myself, because then maybe I can get a cut on comics.
I was going to ask if there's any of that motivation there.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah. And then I made him mine. So
You got the comics
All the
and
comic book
Paul, yeah.
I
discounts.
got both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. And was he also writing comics at that time as well?
He was. He was writing a thing called Attitude Lad, which was a very punk rock sort of, and like a one-writer anthology type of deal.
Okay.
And that was coming out from slave labor in, I think it was like 94 or 96, somewhere in there. And then he was like working on his novels and running the shop. I mean, running the shop took a lot of creative energy
Sure.
out of both of us
Yeah.
after a while. And then while he was taking care of that, he sort of steered me into, you know, focusing on drawing, focusing on getting my storytelling down, and then we moved. So
was
and
that something?
That's when he started working full time as a writer.
Oh, so was that something you had always wanted? I mean, like when you first met him, at that point, were you already on a path to like, I think I want to do comics?
I had always wanted to, but I never thought I would be able to, and not because of any like personal failing on my part. It was all geographical.
Yeah.
I thought in order to do comics, you needed to live in New York City.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And for a lot of people, that was true. Because, I mean, this is before internet.
Right.
Or at the very nascent days of internet. So when I first started doing like small favors, I would pack up my originals and send them to Seattle for Fantagraphics
Dang.
to photograph, and that was really hard.
Oh, yeah.
And not to mention expensive.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I was working completely, you know, pen and paper, brush and paper, whatever. So yeah, I didn't think that was an option. All evidence to the contrary notwithstanding, you know, I had seen Wendy and Richard Pini. They live in Poughkeepsie. I had seen Los Bros Hernandez. They live in L.A. or wherever they were living. I don't know, San Diego, whatever, Southern California.
Right.
So, but apparently that didn't apply to me.
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, that is the thing. I mean, yeah, at that time, and also you know, like the image that was painted of the comic industry was like that Marvel bullpen, where it's like, okay, all
Right.
these guys are in the same building.
Right.
However real that really was, or whether it was
that's
just
not real at
the imagination of Stan Lee creating this wonderful place to work.
Yeah.
It's
But,
not just all within a big globe that is Stan Lee's head.
Yeah, no, that's all Marvel Comics
Okay,
still
yeah,
is,
yeah.
right?
I thought so. Well, now it's Bendis' head.
That's true. Yeah. But yeah, and so where did Small Favors come from then? Was that your idea to?
Well, actually, at the time that I started working on it, Paul and I had been working on like a proto version of Banana Sunday, and this was like during the manga boom. So I was like, yeah, we'll do something sort of manga-y, and Banana Sunday was like very, very manga influenced. It looked a lot more like Rumiko Takahashi than it wound up looking like after. But then one of my jobs at the comic shop was to take care of the adult section, which would get out of order every day.
Of course.
So I
Just
know. And the adult comics at the time were pretty grim. I mean, there were some good ones. There was like what's it called? It was a manga. Bondage Fairies. That was really good. There were a couple others that were somewhat sex positive. Birdland by Gilbert Hernandez. But otherwise, they were all sort of very, very male, very informed by underground comics, by drug culture, by violence, by iconoclasm in general.
Sure.
They just weren't very much fun to read, and they certainly weren't for ladies. Even though that was true, many of the ladies that came into the shop would go directly to the adult comics. And that's the ladies who were coming in who weren't like pull list customers. Right. So the women who were coming in who weren't reading superhero comics were reading Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, Lenore, or adult comics. And I was like, well, surely I can do better than that. Yeah. And provide these women with a product. Yeah. And also...
Saw a gap in the market.
Yeah, exactly. And also I was like, I'm not going to get bored of this. This is going to be fun to draw.
Right, yeah.
And because I like drawing women, I was like, I can just leave men out of this altogether. And it'll still be popular with everybody. Which,
if the internet has proved anything.
Which, in fact, turned out to be true. So those were basically my motivations. I wanted something sex positive. I wanted something for women to be able to read and enjoy. And I wanted something that I could sell in my shop, which is why I called it Small Favors instead of something like, bless his heart, Kim Thompson suggested My Tiny Tart or Naughty Nymphet. He was like, it'll sell better if it has a dirty title. And I was like...
I don't know about that.
And to his credit, he did not like kick. He was like, "That's fine. That makes sense." Well, what we'll do instead is we'll have dirty scenes on every cover. And it's like, no, I want to be able to show it on the shelf.
Right.
It's like, that's fine. And so just by asking, or not even insisting, but just by saying, this is actually what I want, they were like, great. So that's how Small Favors came to be.
Very cool. And then that got, obviously, that sort of gained a following.
Yeah. It was pretty cool. I mean, one of the most gratifying things is that other professionals recognized it for a quality product.
Yeah.
I mean, I was still working on Small Favors like the first time I met Darwin Cook.
Oh, wow.
and he looked at it. It was like one of those things where I was like, "Hey, Darwin Cook, I just wanted to thank you for putting panel borders back in comics." and here's my comic. And he was like, "Oh," and you could sort of see his eye go, "Oh, it's an adult comic." And then he opened it up, and he was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, I see a lot of Beto Hernandez in here." And I'm like, I am profoundly influenced by Beto Hernandez. Thank you. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly Small Favors, I mean, as you said, set out to be very different from the other adult comics on the market, and I think, obviously, that was probably why people were drawn to it. It seemed like it was such a pleasant book.
That was apparently kind of revolutionary.
I know. Like,
God's forbid, right?
Yeah.
That it was, it was like light and fun, and
Yeah.
Clearly, yeah, people were.
Do people still ask about that? Like at conventions, do they bring it up? Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, a lot of people still bring it up. A lot of comics retailers bring it up because it's been out of print for a while.
I was just gonna bring that up. Having doing research for this episode, I was trying to track down a copy of it, and could not do so.
We are working actively on correcting that.
Oh, very cool.
And I can't talk about that yet.
Okay.
Yep.
With where it's going to be, but it's.
But
it's
anybody
going
listening
to
could
happen.
put a Google alert for Small Favors re-release or Small Favors.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're looking at 2017.
Okay.
Oh, very nice.
Re-release.
Long game,
Google's
people.
not going anywhere. Yeah.
If anything, Google's going everywhere.
Yeah, it's true.
Disturbingly so.
So do that, listeners. Just put that out there right now. Just stop listening.
No, Donovan. We want them to listen.
Well, they'll come back.
Wait.
Yeah, I don't think stop listening should ever be said on the show. Maybe
In 2017, we'll get the listenership boom back.
I hope we're still going.
So,
Donovan's shake of the head. No way we're still doing this in 2 years.
Could have been a whimsical
That'll-
shake.
that'll-
Like,
yeah, no, that'll-
wouldn't that be nice?
that'll be the
Or-
end of this.
Yeah.
So moving from Small Favors, you, like how quickly did you see that the success for that, or I mean,
Well, it was in the catalog.
Mm-hmm.
The Rose Comics, Eros Comic would put out a physical catalog so that people could order stuff.
right?
But it was called Rose Comics on the catalog.
Okay.
On the cover. That was very clever.
Yeah.
It was clearly a hit.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's a popular genre.
Yes.
So I couldn't really. I knew that I didn't want to be stuck, or not stuck, but I would say I didn't want to be known as that lady who does porn comics.
Right.
And so I knew when the 8th issue came around that was going to be pretty much it.
Okay.
And I wanted to do something else, and that's when the start of Banana Sunday came back, and we reworked our old story, which had been about the 3 talking monkeys and blah blah blah, but had been a completely other kind of story.
Right.
Yeah.
And started working on that.
Oh yeah. Okay. So you and Paul were working on that, and then one question I have is sort of about the way you two work. You're writer and artist, but I imagine that there's a lot of back and forth on that in a way.
Not really.
No, really.
No.
So does it work like he writes a script and then you really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. We work together almost exactly the same way as we would work with any other professional. He is not a writer who likes a lot of input.
Okay.
He doesn't like a lot of he until he's done with the script, he doesn't really want to have any sort of ideas thrown out there. Afterward, I'll say like, well, you use this word like 2-3 times on a page or in a panel. We should probably change that up, or maybe this particular thing doesn't work logically quite the way you want it. We should change it this way. That's pretty rare, but that's really as much collaboration on writing as I do.
That's interesting.
Because we're always fascinated by the back and forth between
Just in general,
writers and artists, like not only their collaborative efforts, but also the lines of communication between like, are you seeing like ideas bounce back and forth, or are you seeing editorializing, I guess.
It's funny because when I work with Jeff Parker, he will talk to me about what he's writing because we have a desk that's like right next to each other.
Right.
So he would be like jabbering to me while writing an X-Men First Class script when I was working on that with him, and then I would go, yeah, Howard the Duck or something like that, and then Howard the Duck would show up on the street or whatever.
Like he does.
Sure.
Yeah. So Jeff and I actually work a lot more sort of collaboratively that way in the writing process, but Paul and I do not. And that's true, I think, of him and all the artists he works with.
Yeah, I know that. There's a lot of writers who are more linear, want more input. I mean, they said like Jeff Parker or whatever. I know like a Scott Snyder really like intensely scripts and then really doesn't want like detailed to. And actually, I know in Bandette some of Paul's scripts are in there, and I was reading through those, and they're delightful to read, by the way, too. I really like the way Paul's scripts read.
Yeah, and his scripts to me are a little bit more personal because, he knows me.
Sure, yeah.
And so we work with a lot more, like, shorthand with each other. Like, if he says, it's like that thing on the corner or whatever, I'll know what he's talking about. If he's working with somebody who lives in, like, Italy or whatever,
right.
he'll be a little bit less...
be a bit more explicit.
Yeah, and a little more explicit, and also like with a little bit more details. Like be sure to have people who aren't white on this page or whatever, and stuff like that. And with me, Paul knows that he doesn't have to add that stuff in. So
right, yeah, and so then coming from that, at what point then did you? So you did a Banana Sunday. And what was the next step from that, I guess, is?
The next project after that was Gingerbread Girl.
Okay, yeah.
Which I worked on continuously, like I said, as I was also doing work for hire at Marvel.
Yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to get
So that sort of happened at the same time.
Yeah, the timeline there. So did you go from Banana Sunday, was like there a reaction to that, and then Marvel was interested in you doing work? Or
what happened actually was Jeff Parker sent a copy of it to his editor. He was doing work, he was working on the Marvel Adventures All Ages line. His editor got a hold of it and was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, so he was like, he gave Paul some writing work, and and then Jeff sort of bullied him into letting me do like a funny strip in the back of X-Men First Class.
Ah, yeah.
So between those two things, we both started getting more and more work, mostly through the editor Nate Cosby.
And I always wondered, like, is that like the goal of like a comic? Is that like, oh my God, Marvel?
Well. It was. I mean, it is for some.
Yeah. I mean,
and it was certainly great fun.
Yeah.
And it was like, it was great to have work.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I imagine that. Yeah, any work is probably pretty good.
Paychecks are nice, John.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like at the time when I started working for Marvel, I was making more money than Paul was. He was working full time at Powell's bookstore.
Oh, okay.
And he continued there for like 3 years until he couldn't afford to work there anymore because he was getting more work from Marvel than he was. So like going to
I can't afford to keep this job.
Yeah, going to his job was cutting into his fun job.
How terrible that must be.
But as far as like longevity, I mean, it's like I never expected to be like the next Jim Lee or whatever.
Right.
Because I'm me.
Right. Well, I was going to actually ask about that because your style is very specific. It's instantly recognizable. It doesn't scream Marvel right off the bat. I mean,
right.
like it. And I just want like when they were sort of assigning you books or how did that work? Because it seems a lot of the stuff you did at Marvel was very specific to your style, or a lot of it was.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that made it like okay. It's like I wouldn't have wanted to do a monthly book because for one thing I would never have been able to keep up the pace, and my work would have suffered and it would have been crap.
Right.
If I had tried to force it, I probably wouldn't have had very much fun. Working in continuity with the crazy cross stories and everything like that, it would have made me sad.
Yeah.
And so I was doing these out of continuity stories that were a lot of fun, that sort of were very directly informed by my own comics reading as a kid. I grew up reading, Claremont and Byrne X-Men, and that's great. It was great to be able to deal with those characters, and I had like the one reprint of X-Men #1, by Jack Kirby, and so
nice.
So that was like my rock
right.
for X-Men First Class. I did a story for Power Pack.
Yes, yeah.
Where I had them team up with Hercules, and that was awesome. That was like my one writing gig at Marvel that I really, really dug.
I look over at Gorgoni because he's the biggest Hercules fan.
I am such a huge fan of the Incredible Herc. He's one of my favorite characters of all time.
He was great fun to write because he just loves Hercules.
And like, especially with characters like the Power Pack, he's the fun uncle.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he was babysitting in my story.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And of course I did like all the bad writer things of I'm gonna tell a story about somebody telling a story. Oh, that was a bad idea. That's actually really hard to draw. So I paid my dues on that, but that was fun. So
you mentioned writing. I mean, primarily you do art, but do you enjoy writing as well?
I enjoy writing occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I only really enjoy it when a story comes into my head sort of fully formed, like Athena coming out of the skull of Zeus.
Yeah.
And otherwise, it's not a muscle that I've really exercised. I have discovered that when it comes to writing, I'd rather draw.
Okay. All right. And so then you mentioned Gingerbread Girl, which was sort of being done simultaneously with this stuff. Was that sort of like was it like a Marvel's my day job, and then I go to this sort of creative?
Yeah, it was. It was kind of our way of maintaining our indie art cred.
Yeah.
Because, like I say, we were both working at Marvel. We had been for like a couple years, and we wanted to make sure that people didn't forget that we were sort of independent comics people. And it allowed Paul to write something that wasn't, according to the Marvel guidelines, especially the Marvel All Ages guidelines.
Sure,
which were
yeah.
like, you can't have any swords, you can't have any sex, you can't have any of this or that.
Right.
And it just let us do this weird art book. That we really still can't. We don't know what it's about.
I was just going to ask, where did that idea come from? It's such a specific and original idea.
That idea came from when Paul was working at Powell's. He was working in the science section. He was the head of the science section, which was in the kids' room.
If you're the head of the science section, do they get to call you doctor?
No.
Professor?
That would be awesome, but no. But he borrowed a book, like one of these like galley books that they get at bookstores, that was all about neurology, and it had something about the Penfield homunculus, which is a concept rather than a thing. It's
When I was reading the book, I had to go and look. I'm like, is this a thing?
It's a real thing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It seems totally crazy.
It's real in scare quotes. It's like it's like the areas of the brain which, if stimulated, will correspond to the various parts of the bodies, and it sort of creates a map that is sort of like a body on the surface of the brain. It's all sort of what do you call it? Conceptual rather than actual.
Sure.
Right.
But then the conceit of the book is that it's removed from this girl's brain by her mad scientist father, which is just like bonkers and weird.
Oh yeah. It's super
and then
fun.
turned into another
and then
person.
cloned into like a human sister thing, or maybe not.
Who now gets all the
emotions
and responses.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It was like a I'm trying to remember how I described it, but it's this like sci-fi date adventure mystery. That's like
sci-fi date adventure mystery.
It's
That's
just
as good as
it's so much fun though.
sum
Like
up as I have come across. I was so grateful when I saw. Have you all seen a Serious Man by the Coen brothers?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we saw that, we were like, oh,
yeah.
we can just tell people it's like that.
Yeah. Oh, it's
Yeah.
It's like that line, embrace the mystery.
Yes.
I don't know what it's about.
Yeah. I love that movie, and that scene is great too. The embrace the mystery. Where did the switching narrators of that come from? That's one of my favorite parts of the
the
book.
bulldog being
That I think the only other place I've seen that is in the book The Iguana. is it the Iguana or the prequel to the Iguana? It was, oh shoot, I can't remember the artist and writer. It was published by Dark Horse, but it was like a European or South American comic, black and white, and it was about like a Banana Republic dictator with like this evil fixer character. And it was actually, it's very sort of Los Bros Hernandez type of story, but it was one of these narrated by different people. It wasn't the sort of Rashomon unreliable characters or unreliable narrators sort of thing, the way that that Gingerbread Girl wound up being, because of course nobody knows what's going on.
Right. Sure.
But I think that was like the inspiration for that.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. It was one of my favorite parts of the book.
Certainly. And it's so fun, the fluidity of it, you know?
Yeah.
You're like walking down the street and all of a sudden you're like, wait, main character's walking away. Why am I paying attention to this
she talks
magician?
for like 3 pages and then it's all other people.
That's all other people and animals.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I love the pigeon, yeah.
The pigeon and the bulldog.
Pidgey's pretty popular.
Yeah.
And so so you're at Marvel. You're doing Gingerbread Girl. At what point does Bandette become an idea, or is I mean, one thing I'm fascinated by is like, do you when these, is it ever like, does Paul come to you and go like, I want to do this, or do you go to him and go, I want to do this?
Usually it's him.
Okay, usually it's him.
But in the case of Bandette, we had met and befriended Chris Robertson and his wife Allison Baker. They came up with this idea for a digital publishing house, Monkey Brain, which was going to be an extension of like their book publishing that they had for some years. They laid out this business plan where all the books in this Monkey Brain umbrella would go exclusive with Comixology, and then all print rights would remain with the creators. And it seemed like a good idea, and we had to come up with something for it. So I had drawn for my sketch blog this sort of French cop character, because I was feeling French one day, and with a big nose. You do. With a big nose and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And I called him Inspector B.D. Elgique of the Sûreté. And I was like, I want to use that guy. And Paul's like, I want a teen girl, like a teen detective, except not a detective. I want her to be a thief. I was like, okay. So there would be this cop and this thief. That's great. We'll do a French comic about a cop and a thief. Great. And that's where Bandette came from.
Oh, very cool. I know you're a particular fan of...
it's awesome. I mean, I talked about this before, but it's very evocative of, like, the Peter Sellers Pink Panther movies, which I'm a huge fan of.
Me too.
It's got a little... great Muppet caper in there, which is great.
I get a definite like Lupin the Third is
Lupin the Third is an influence.
The anime, not so much the manga as much.
Right. I haven't seen the manga, so yeah.
It's a little darker.
Okay.
And by that I mean significantly darker. I just stick to the anime. It's pleasant and nice.
Nice. There are so many influences on Bandette. There's this French series of novels called Fantomette. Which is, as far as I can tell, I don't read French, and it hasn't been translated. It's like a Nancy Drew, except she wears a little tunic, a little yellow tunic with a little black beanie hat and a cape. So Bandette is, for looks, very much influenced by her. She wears a domino mask. I guess she's huge in France. I don't know. I was influenced for the cartooning by Jacques Tardy, Dupuy and Barbarian. Sorry.
That's right. All we do is butcher
Monsieur
names
Jean,
on this podcast. So,
right?
Yeah.
Wait till we get to the recommendation section, and then I'll just be like butchering names left and right.
Yeah. But like Cary Grant movies and Audrey
absolutely.
Hepburn movies.
Yeah.
When the Strangler bad guy came up, I was like, okay, I know who I'm going to base him on. It's Henry Fonda out of Once Upon a Time in the West.
Oh, yes.
He's really bad, right?
Super bad.
He's super bad.
Yeah.
And also, is it Jason Robards?
Who?
No, not Jason Robards. Oh, shoot. the cowboy in Charade. And I know I've already put Jason Robards out there. It's
And now all I can think
was,
of is
he played Flint, our man Flint.
Oh, James Coburn.
James Coburn, thank
you. Oh, cool.
So,
yeah.
Glad you're here, John, because Donovan and I were just
I'll get there, but it'll be a long time.
Charade. I was like, but our man Flint, yes. That I know. No, I know Charade as well, of course. But yeah, that's right. It does have a very old-fashioned kind of feel to it in that sense. That old movie kind of vibe.
We discussed this, Paul and I, about how, and it turns out, and we were talking about Fallout 4 earlier before we came on the air. There's that sort of timelessness of yesteryear.
Yeah.
So even though people are running around with cell phones in Bandette, it's also kind of the 60s.
Yeah.
And part of that is nostalgia for our youth, and the comics of our youth, which were mostly made in the 60s, Hergé or Asterix or Tintin or whatever. But because you can sort of future-proof a comic that way, rather than have everything be very, very modern.
Right.
So like for example, in Gingerbread Girl, the main character has a flip phone that she talks on, and so now it's like, oh, that's very dated now.
Yeah.
To be fair, we do
know.
have a friend who only got rid of his flip phone like 6 months ago, so those are still around. You cannot destroy them.
Yeah. So now when I draw, a cell phone, it's just a rectangle, and I don't even try. I don't even try to brand it. It's just like, nah. I put buttons on it, but
Right, yeah.
Well, and it lends to this sort of idyllic state of France. This like...
It's very much a made-up France.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever been to France?
Yeah, actually, we spent like 3 weeks in Paris.
Okay.
After we got married, and so that was fun. It was also kind of like, we're foreigners here, which is great.
Yeah.
Which is, I recommend being a foreigner somewhere.
I'm a foreigner most places.
At some point in your life, spend some time being a foreigner. It's great. It's it's a humbling experience. And so yeah, it's mostly based on memory and Google Street View.
Sure. Both beautiful things.
I know.
Yeah, it does have that. Yeah, it does. It's a comic book France, which I always like stuff like that. I mean, as you mentioned that, it also reminded me of like Bruce Timm's work. You think about like Batman.
I was just about
animated
to bring
series
that up. Yeah,
has that kind of feel where it's like, yeah, they have modern things, but also there are blimps flying around, and
right, and you can see the direct line between Batman Adventures cartoons and Fleischer Studios Superman.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's not even a curve in that highway.
No, and Bruce Timm has mentioned that in numerous interviews I've seen with him and stuff. Yeah, and it is that thing about those Fleischer Superman cartoons are still amazing to look at today. Because of that sort of timeless nature.
But it's interesting that like it's nostalgia to a certain time period that like a lot of the people experiencing it, like especially a younger crowd who might be picking up Bandette or is playing Fallout 4 or watch the Batman shows, it's nostalgia for a time that they didn't even necessarily experience.
Yeah.
I find that so fascinating.
And it's a nostalgia for something that never existed.
Right.
Which I think is really the key. And that is sort of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to recreate something that never happened. It's like Paul and I were walking around one day, and he's like, God, I just want to go home and lie down and read some Roy Thomas Conan comics. But I want to read the Roy Thomas Conan comics that I remember, not the ones that he actually wrote.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, that's what we want, is we want what we remember.
Oh, yeah.
If I could ever recapture that first reading of A Princess of Mars by Edgar S. Burroughs, I would be the happiest man alive.
Yeah.
Well, you've
And
talked
can't do
about
that 'cause
how
you're
many
grown up
times
now.
that you've systematically ruined your childhood by revisiting.
I am on a mission to systematically destroy my childhood by revisiting all the things I used to watch.
Yeah.
Some of it hold up.
I
Like
was gonna say,
Gargoyles
everything.
is like the best thing ever now that I've revisited it because I get all the Shakespeare references. But other things are just like, oh God, my taste was awful. Oh,
Yeah.
It was just uninformed. I don't know
It's
if
true.
it's awful.
Yeah, I think,
it was pretty bad. Beetleborgs.
Well, that notwithstanding.
Beetleborgs.
Something I really enjoy about Bandette is it is the people in the comic are serious to what they're doing, but it's not a comic that where you feel like the stakes of it are like destroying your brain, right? I mean, it has this like flirty, fun vibe to it.
Yeah.
That there's life and death situations.
I was going to say, even when the stakes are like life and death.
But because the main character, Bandette, is so cool about everything and having such a fun time, you as the reader are having a fun time, even if people are being strangled to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, look, it's really fun to draw a guy strangling another dude.
Yeah.
especially if the other dude is a bad guy too.
Yeah.
And I guess that's my moral equivalency right there.
It all balances out.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if there wasn't some actual possibility within the world
Yeah.
for death and mayhem, then why would we even go through this whole exercise?
Sure.
Yeah, very true.
And it's true that Bandette has pretty much got it all covered. She is not really concerned about her own safety. She is very concerned about her friend's safety, which, there's, it's just one of those things where you're like, I am going to create this likable person. Here are the qualities that I imbue her with. She is loyal to her friends and vice versa. So, so that's one of the things I like about her.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, she's one of the most instantly endearing characters I've ever seen in a comic. And just the whole book in general. But, like, right off the bat, she shows up, and it's just like, I love this character.
Awesome.
From her look, the way she talks, the presto thing, I mean, everything about that.
Knockout spray.
Knockout
That's
spray
awesome.
is delightful.
That's straight out of Batman.
I
just love
it has a very,
Show, right?
yeah,
it has a
Everything
very,
was labeled, so
But
you
I
know
just
what
like
it
very
was.
66 vibe.
Yeah.
Or,
I mean,
or Dick Tracy for that matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
just the fact that she's got that, and
Yeah.
like it says it every time she uses.
Yeah.
It's really awesome. Another thing that, and this is probably very specific, but the all the stuff with Matadori is just so much fun.
Yeah.
Like their verbal and physical sword fighting is just. It just sparkles when you read it. It just like
I really like Matadori a lot.
It's so much fun.
Yeah. We had we were so pleased at Rose City Comic Con where a little girl and her mom came and her older sister, and they were dressed as the older sister was dressed as Link, her mom was dressed as Bandette, and she was dressed as Matadori.
Oh, that's so great.
Awesome.
That's so
I've never
cool.
seen a Matadori cosplay before. That was
That's
a first.
really awesome.
Are you starting to see a lot of Bandette cosplay?
The occasional.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say. 'cause
I mean,
it's-
any I feel like would be such a
It's a thrill.
right.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great. The first one I saw was not in person. It was a girl at C2E2, and she was hitting it. And I was so pleased. And there was a couple at Halloween this year. I think one last year, and it's fabulous. I love it. I love it.
I feel like cosplay is the highest compliment to any artist. It's
And
just like,
I
you're
had
dressing
not-
as my thing.
Yeah, and I had not realized it when I designed Bandette, but Bandette is really easy.
Oh, yeah.
Because she's just the red tunic over black bodysuit, cape, mask, wig. Boom, you're done. So
I showed my sister I was just showing her because I was saying I was going to interview, and I was just showing her the cover of this, and she's like, she wears ballet flats.
yeah,
That just blew her mind that there was a comic book character running around in ballet flats. I don't know why. There's something about that.
I have no problem with characters that wear heels or whatever and like magically can do whatever. But yeah, she was never gonna wear pumps or whatever.
It would not fit the character really to do so, and especially running around on the wires would be quite difficult. I imagine. With
I would
that.
think so. Although I think she could do it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm not sure there's anything Bandette can't do, really. So you mentioned conventions. We actually met you at a convention, and what has that experience been like? How long have you been going to? Did you attend conventions as a fan before?
No.
Okay.
Not really. We started, I think, the first, small favors thing that I went to was probably a San Diego.
Okay, so starting right out in the big leagues
Yeah.
then.
and I was hanging out with, Fantagraphics people. That was fun because, Kim Thompson had me draw in his sketchbook, and I was like, well, who else is in here? Oh, Robert Crumb. Great. No pressure. So yeah. But no, I like going to conventions when I can. It's kind of getting to be less feasible just because travel is a drag.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Travel is a drag, and taking time out from work is.
And there's like a
hard.
convention every other day. It seems
There
like
is.
we were talking to Ben Saunders about that, where it's just like, is this going to hit some kind of critical mass at some point where
I think it has to.
it's just it can't possibly sustain this, can it? Like it's just like
Yeah.
there's a convention for everything all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to retread the topic too much, but I feel like because the internet has bred this sort of like microcosm within a microcosm of these subcultures, because we can have this tribe mentality with such a specific thing, to have that physically represented is important to these fan bases. So I don't think these things are going away as long as these fan bases exist.
Yeah. And I mean, I love to meet people, but I can talk to them for a lot longer on Twitter than I can in person.
This is true.
So, it becomes a real struggle to make it to a lot of shows, and even when shows are like willing to foot the bill, it becomes a real problem for
Well, it's still large swaths of your time.
huge amounts of time that I just can't afford.
Well,
So-
and at a convention, you're going to have people seeking you out, but there's also going to be people, thousands of people there, not for that, and it's just like watching people walk by and the interaction that way, as opposed to Twitter, where they're like seeking you out and they want to spend that time with you.
Right. So, or whatever other social media they
Sure, yeah.
choose. I'm mostly on Twitter, but yeah. So, I really enjoy Rose City because I can walk there. I still enjoy Emerald City, although I'm probably not going to table there this year. I'm probably just going to do like signings with Dark Horse or whatever, and. I like the occasional other show. I am physically overwhelmed by San Diego. I don't think I can do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, that's almost become something beyond a convention to a certain extent. I don't know what it is now.
I find it like seriously physically painful to go. But which is too bad because I used to really, really dig it. I used to really enjoy that.
I've
very
heard that
long
from
weekend.
a number of people about
Yeah.
like the sort of that's just expanded beyond all
Yeah.
means.
And I can't blame anybody.
No.
I mean, people do what they like.
Yeah.
Right,
And,
yeah.
Nerd culture has become just culture.
In this case, it's just 150,000
Yeah.
people doing what they like, and I am just not into that many people. I really enjoy a small show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do I. Something I want to ask about is Bandette won an Eisner.
Yeah, we did.
What was that experience like?
Well, that was pretty cool.
I was going to say that had to be. I mean, how was that even? How are you informed of that, or is it? I mean, because I've never talked to anyone. I don't think who's won an Eisner. So
You're the first.
I know this is. I want to get it. Is there an award ceremony? How does this work? Okay, so
it's at San Diego.
Yeah, I know that.
We were informed by our publisher. I think what happens is before the actual announcement happens of who's been nominated, the publishers are informed.
Okay.
And then the publishers can choose to inform the creators.
Are there ones that don't?
I don't know.
Just
I
like,
don't know.
hey,
I
you
mean-
won an Eisner. I did.
No, I mean,
don't
this
let
is
them
for the
know.
nomination.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. I don't think they let people know ahead of time that they're going to win.
I'm just imagining a publisher that never told them they were nominated. No one ever told them, and they found out after the
You
fact.
find out.
Where's my
They
Eisner?
let
Yeah.
you know. They let you know. But yeah, so we knew both times that we were nominated because we were also nominated this last
Yeah, I saw. Yeah.
that we had been nominated. Just like 24 hours beforehand, before the announcement. So we were all like,
Yeah.
we got nominated and we can't tell anybody. So like I had
Why are you doing that happy dance quietly in the corner? No reason.
So like this last year when we were nominated, I had a GIF all ready to go. I had made that GIF. It was ready. But
Loaded in the GIF cannon.
yeah, but it was very gratifying the first time, especially because let's see, I was nominated for colors and for what was I nominated for then? I think it was like best penciler inker, and I was up against like I remember who won. It was Chris Somney and David Aja.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Split it. And I was like,
Yeah, those guys are pretty good.
yeah, and like Chris is a buddy of mine, and so I was nominated alone for those two, and then we won for Best Digital Comic, and we were also nominated at the time for Best New Series.
Mm.
And that was something that we were really excited about because it had not been published in print yet.
Oh, wow.
So we were, I have asked if another digital series had ever been nominated for Best New Series, and I've been told that yes, some other series was, but nobody can remember what it was.
Something or other. That's great.
Basically, that means don't get too cocky.
Yeah.
That's like, yeah, there's something. Whatever.
I think something was nominated at some point somewhere.
Cannot remember. But so that was amazing because and it was also really cool because at the banquet there were the first 3 nominations were color, letterer, and digital comic. So color was first. I didn't win. I forget. Oh, it was Dave. It was Stewart.
I was just going to say, was it Dave Stewart?
It was Dave Stewart. Which duh.
Yeah, he's the colorist everyone can name. So
Yeah, and then it was letters, and then it was digital comics. So the third award that was given, we won.
wow. Yeah.
So for the rest of the award ceremony, which was like another 2 hours, we were like, "Yay! We don't care."
Just ride that high to the end.
Yeah, and when Somni won his, I was like, "Yeah, high five, bro!"
We're the same.
Yeah.
We both won.
Yeah.
And then is there a trophy?
Yeah, it's
okay.
cool, too.
I've never seen it. What does it look like?
All I've ever seen is the sticker on the book.
I know that's
Oh, there's one upstairs.
very cool.
Wow.
I'll show you on your way up.
All right.
That's awesome.
It's
This
a little globe.
awesome.
It's based on when Scott McCloud did Understanding Comics. He did an image of a globe. With
Okay.
comics all over it.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It was based on that.
Cool.
Except it's got Will Eisner's fancy.
The classic
signature
Will
on it.
Eisner
Yeah.
signature. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm always so fascinated by them because they don't get reported on that
Really?
much. I don't think they do. We did an episode about it.
We kind of did.
I know we should, but I'm just saying, like,
Toot our own horn, why don't we?
but it's
Here's
just
the thing that nobody knew until they started doing this, because I had been going to the Eisners, and I was at the first one where they had an actual award, not just a little plaque.
right.
Oh.
And the first one was handed to Sergio Aragones, and he was
Nice.
like, "Oh, look,
Very
you can
nice.
spin the little globe," and it like fell right out.
Of course.
Of course, that would happen to him too.
And Mr. Eisner is just watching this thing with a smile on his face.
That's amazing.
That's my only regret about the Eisner Award is that I didn't, have it handed to me by Will Eisner.
yeah.
But you can't have everything.
This is true. You do still have an Eisner.
No, robotics are getting pretty good.
I know, right? Holograms.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Hard light hologram Will Eisner.
Yeah.
Almost the same.
Almost. Except,
Spritz a little of his cologne in the air and it's like he's really there.
he's so cute. He's so cute up
Look
there.
for that in 2020.
Anything that I've this is not a Will Eisner episode, but anything I've ever read about him, he just seemed like he was a delightful man.
I
Like
shook
he
his
was
hand
just
once. He was a delight to me.
wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
He said I was sweet.
That's really
Oh,
cool because you
wow.
would hate like years later to be like, oh, remember this like groundbreaking person?
Yeah.
they're the worst.
What a
You know,
jerk,
like
that guy.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to hear that.
And
No.
there are plenty of those in the comic book history.
We're not mentioning those people.
Okay.
We're definitely not mentioning Alan Moore. Yeah, never.
They don't maybe deserve the time, you know? Like we want to talk to people and about people who are doing awesome things
Yeah.
and are also very pleasant. Yeah.
Yeah. We can't go an episode without taking a shot at old Alan Moore, though, can we?
Look, there's a
least you
tradition, I feel like, now.
Poor Alan Moore. You mentioned the one best digital series. I always like to ask artists: is there a difference to your approach to doing the digital work?
No.
Okay.
I have one restriction that I put on myself for Bandette, and I probably would have done this anyway, is that all my layouts are 3 tiers, but I draw my pages on paper. I lay them out digitally, and then I color them digitally, and I letter them digitally. and of course I publish them digitally.
Right.
But I draw them. The ink is on paper.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by this because obviously it's sort of this big shift in the medium, or maybe not even shift, but it's such a new thing still to a certain extent. Is this digital comics?
When I first started thinking about working on it, I told Paul, I was like, well, maybe I'll make all the panels phone shaped, right? Because it's going to be on Comixology. He's like, don't do that, because you don't know what shape a phone is going to be next year.
Yeah.
You know, it could be an octagon for all you know. And it's like, yeah, you
man, now I want an octagon phone.
I know. and so, but yeah, I keep them in 3 tiers because I don't want like I'm not really a big fan of splashes in the first place. But if you keep it in tiers, then that whole panel by panel view, sort of as you're flipping through the digital comic, at least you don't have to have one of these. I'm going to look at part of this panel and then another part and then another part, and it's all going to be according to whatever the guy in the tech department at Comixology decides.
Right.
But you know, with a tier, at most you're just panning across one panel.
To be fair to that guy at Comixology, they usually do a pretty smash-up job.
Great job.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, amazing. Of the devices I like to read Bandette on, the iPad first, iPhone second, and the browser distant third.
Yeah, I use my Kindle quite a bit for Comixology stuff, and like even like you can turn it sideways and kind of like scroll through the whole page. And for some comics that works, but for the vast majority, when you're doing the panel by panel stuff, it works really well. It flows very nicely.
Yeah.
And now this has just become a commercial for Comixology.
Well, I thought it was our
didn't even give
podcast
us
for a
any money.
second. Panel by panels. Is that what we're called?
No.
Oh no.
This whole time you've been saying that?
Oh yeah.
Our cards say the other thing.
Do you know anybody who removes lower back tattoos?
Yes, talk to me after the podcast.
It's a side question, not related to anything.
One other thing I want to ask you about is you and Paul have worked on some licensed books, I believe Adventure Time. What is that experience like to work obviously in somebody else's world, kind of in that sense?
Well, we've working on a licensed product for Adventure Time is very similar to working on a licensed product for Marvel.
Sure.
The only difference is that we're not familiar with the thing from childhood. It's just this thing that's been on TV for a few years. That was great. We worked with Wook-Jin Clark, who we call Hunter, but because that's kind of his name. But he's got 2 names anyway. Edit that shit out. That's not necessary.
Yes,
No.
we'll be sure to edit this out.
Yeah.
Right, John?
The fact that you're not hearing this right now means that it was cut out.
Anyway, so we got to work with our pal Wook-Jin Clark. We got to co-write, which is like Paul writes, and then I kibitz a lot. So I got some really good jokes in there, though. That was fun. So that was a lot of fun, and I also got to draw some cover art for that as well.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm always fascinated about that when you sort of get into that world of I mean, obviously the Marvel and DC stuff, but sort of you get more specific with like this is this creator's thing.
Well,
Right.
I mean, if you think about the Marvel and DC stuff, it's not all that different. I mean, you're dealing with somebody else's toy box at that point.
It's basically getting paid to do fanfic.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's the bottom line. And it's like with Adventure Time, they told us, look, there are some rules that you can't break. You can make up any kind of new princess or any kind of new wizard, but don't make up any other kind of characters.
Interesting.
So,
Princess or wizards?
Yeah.
That's it.
yeah.
There are lots of those
Yeah.
in Adventure Time.
No, I knew that, but that's just
Yeah.
awesome. Very specific. I wanted to see that email. That's like princess or wizards only.
And I mean, they didn't want us to like do any origin stories of
Yeah.
anybody or anything
Yeah.
like that. And
Unless it was a wizard or a princess.
unless it's a wizard or a princess, and not like Princess Bubblegum,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like some other princess. But But yeah, so that was just fun because, boy, if there's one thing Paul likes to do, it's absurdity, and there is a lot of that.
You picked the right thing.
In Adventure Time, we were talking to some friend of ours, and she's like, "Yeah, my roommates and I like to get baked and read your comics to each other."
Thank you.
Yeah, great. I think that's the right thing to do.
Very cool. Do you guys have anything specifically?
I just was with now we're talking about licensed things and Marvel and DC. Are there any properties or characters that you, like, from the get-go have always wanted to write and or draw?
Good question.
Right now, my bucket list includes pretty much the Marvel family.
Okay.
That might be it.
Okay.
I've done Batgirl now.
Yeah.
And specifically the Yvonne Craig Batgirl, and that was really important to me as a kid.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice.
And so that little box has been checked. Really, as far as other stuff, there's always it's always fun to explore things, and even stuff that I'm not really emotionally invested in. If I get an assignment to do something. For like a cover or whatever, I will do, the amount of research that's necessary. And then, like, when I'm drawing, that person becomes a person in me.
Yeah.
And it gets really internalized. And it's like, that's why, like, when I was drawing Gingerbread Girl and there were some emotional stuff, it was bummed out.
Yeah.
Because it matters.
Yeah,
right?
it does matter.
And I think that's when you're doing it right, I guess.
No, it definitely, like, an artist's emotional attachment to their own work definitely shows when they have the passion to, like, know that these characters are people as well. They're not just flat things on a page.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
That shows in comics, and I think it definitely shows in your work as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Anything you're going to? Okay, they're good. Cool. So we're going to turn out a segment we do whenever we have a guest. We turn things over to Donovan Eilert for a segment called Weird Questions with Donovan Eilert.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. Which famous musical composer do you think you could best in a fight?
I wonder if Liszt was a pushover.
Kind of hid behind that piano a lot.
Yeah. And he was a ladies' man. He was a big ladies' man. Chopin. He's a sickly fellow.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah, I'm going to go Chopin.
Chopin is Chopin.
Yeah.
All right, good answer. What is the longest medical term you know?
Other than Penfield homunculus?
Or, that qualifies.
Oh, wait. I know this from biology. Endoplasmic reticulum.
That
Nice.
sounds painful.
It's part... What is it?
It's part of the mitochondria, isn't it?
It's part of the mitochondria. Yeah. It's part of a cell.
I believe so.
Yeah. I remember...
We're just busting out that knowledge.
Maybe you remember it for the same reason that I do. I remember thinking, that is a great supervillain name. Endoplasmic reticulum.
I am the endoplasmic reticulum, and I have come for your cellular walls.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I had not thought about that before. The last one is, what Harrison Ford movie is it most fun to insert the word banana into the title?
You've officially lost it, Donovan.
Like, say, Raiders of the Lost Banana.
I got it. Mosquito banana.
There you go.
Banana. Thank you. That is excellent.
Very nice.
I watched that movie and I was like, what the hell is this?
Mosquito Coast? That is...
You're not alone.
That's
I
got to be
know.
the strangest movie he's
I
been
know,
in.
You're
right?
not alone.
They came... That,
What?
I believe that was probably considered a career misstep for him.
I
Some,
think it
The
was.
only part that I retain is that's the other movie he worked with River Phoenix,
Yeah.
kind of relationship with. Is that like the only part?
Yeah.
But the rest of it I kind of try to forget.
Yeah.
I think that was Peter Weir as well, who also made Witness with him.
Was it?
Which
I
is
believe so.
an
Which
amazing
is
movie.
the only time he got nominated for an Oscar. So he's like, let's do this again. And unfortunately, it was the Mosquito Coast.
Yeah.
Cool. So we turn out of the way. We end every episode with our recommendation segment where we recommend comics we think you should be reading. We always like to start with our guests. Colleen, do you have anything you want to recommend?
Do I?
Oh, great.
Well, all my husband's work.
It is great stuff.
Let's list it off. Okay. Colder.
Great book.
Super creepy horror.
Oh, yeah.
Mystery Girl.
Oh yeah.
New sort of sci-fi.
I saw that the other day.
magical realism
That just started,
sort of
didn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just started yesterday.
Yeah.
Just came out yesterday. With Alberto J. Albuquerque. He's
saw that,
he lives in Madrid.
He's fantastic.
What did I just recommend of his?
Something. I've heard that name. He's
Letter 44.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah, another great book.
Also, I should mention that Colder is drawn by the monstrously good Juan Ferreira.
Oh yeah.
What else is Paul doing? Oh, Plants vs. Zombies.
Yes, that's right. I always see his name on that.
It's
I'm
good
like,
for everybody.
Paul's doing Plants vs. Zombies. That's fun.
Kids love that. All I hear
sure.
from like parents
Yes,
is,
kids, only kids. Definitely not me.
Oh my
Right before we
gosh.
got here.
oh my gosh. I hear so many parents go, my kid will put down the Plants vs. Zombie game to read the comic book. And I'm like, awesome. And Nimona, which Paul did not write, but is kind of awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I just picked that up for the first time just last week, and I'm enjoying it immensely.
Oh, it's a fantastic book.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. Very cool.
Nicole, what's her last name?
Noah, isn't it Noel Stevenson?
Noelle Stevenson.
Yeah.
Sorry, Noelle.
Oh, that's right. another person whose name comes up a lot on our show.
Yeah,
is Noel
from
Stevenson.
Lumberjanes. Another Eisner winner.
Yeah.
Winner.
Yeah, right, and deservedly so.
Oh
yeah.
Amazing book. Donovan, what do you got?
So I just read the first issue and the only issue out at this point of Limbo, which is a new comic from Image. Somebody in a comic shop recommended it to me, and I was like, I have a few dollars. So, yes, I took a gamble, and it paid off extremely well. Neither of the creators had I ever heard of before, I don't think, but it's a story by Dan Walters with art by Casper Wynyard. And I say it like that because it is Wijngaard. So
That sounds very Scandinavian.
it is very Scandinavian, I believe. I don't know. But it is a story about this detective who doesn't remember anything before 9 months previously, and his identity's kind of been stripped, and he's trying to figure it back. And he's in Didonde City, I think is where he is, and a lot of weird voodoo stuff going on that's really
Sweet.
cool. He's trying to be a detective, and it's getting funky and weird. There are cannibals, presumably, that have just shown up. And
Well, if you're going to have voodoo, you got to have cannibals.
I mean, it is, yeah, like people come from the swamps, do crazy things, and go back to the swamps. And it is just like, it's gritty and fun, beautifully drawn. Like I said, a great gamble. Really, really fun. The first issue just came out. I think the second one's coming out soon. So, Limbo is really, really excellent comic.
Cool.
Awesome. My recommendation this week is James Bond, which is Dynamite.
Just in general.
Just James Bond in general. Just pick it up.
24 movies.
Yeah, whatever. Warren Ellis is writing James Bond for Dynamite.
wow.
Yeah, no, and it's specific. I do like that it's specifically, and it's called the Ian Fleming's James Bond. He's really taken it back to the novels, this is a much grittier Bond than I think people are familiar with. If you just know Bond from the movies, this book opens up with a extended chase sequence where Bond loses his gun, cuts a guy's fingers off with a shovel, and then shoots him in the face. Nice. And you're just like, wow, okay, yeah, this is a different kind of Bond than you would expect.
Awesome.
And it's super gritty and like noirish. And man, is it fun! There's 2 issues out of it now. I believe it's drawn by Jason Masters. And it's it's Warren Ellis to begin with, and James Bond. It's super fun. It's really good.
Fair enough.
Good gig.
Does the Bond in the book, does he resemble any of the previous Bonds?
No, he does not really. He's drawn. I think he's drawn more on the way that he's described in the books.
Kind of nondescript.
Yeah, but he's just sort of a generic man, like in a
Was he described with black hair or blonde?
black hair.
I thought so.
Yeah. And
I've
so
only read a couple of the novels.
Yeah, and the novels are a little shocking too. I think when people go
Ian
back
Fleming
and
wasn't fond of
a lot of people.
things,
Yeah, I was gonna say,
or sexes, or
I was gonna say genders, races,
social classes,
Yeah.
Creeds, ways of being.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. He had a problem with. But other than that, they're super fun books.
They have great titles.
You can get past
They
the
have
rampant,
really good titles.
You can get past the rampant misogyny and racism. They're pretty good spy stories. So yeah, it's, James Bond is from Dynamite.
Cool.
Dragoni?
I guess it's me. I've got another Image book here. This is one I saw the first trade of it just came out. It looked super cool, so I picked it up off the shelf. It's called Run, Love, Kill. It's stories by John Suey and art by Eric Canete, Canete. Canete? I do not know.
See, you don't feel so bad now, do you?
This is why I picked a book by Warren Ellis.
But anyway, but they both also like co-wrote the overarching story of
Very
this book. And color and lettering by Leonardo Olea. I can pronounce that name. But Run, Love, Kill is a story of this young woman who's kind of like escaped from a weird like government experimentation. We're not quite sure what's going on. It's got a very like a Run, Lola, Run kind of vibe to it, where she's just like constantly on the move, constantly trying to keep ahead of her past or whatever's happening. She's got some kind of like mysterious teleportation power, but then as we're reading the book, because this just like drops you into a weird sci-fi setting that you're not quite sure, like, is it a dystopian future? Is it some kind of alternate reality? You're not quite sure, and by the first trade, you still don't know. Which is really fun and exciting because you're just kind of like picking up context clues and trying to figure out how this world works. So teleportation is definitely a thing in this world, and it works via this weird like plant system that people control with their emotions.
Sure,
it's very bizarre. And
Wow.
and she has this power to just do it herself for some reason. But then you have these bad guys in awesome robotic dinosaurs coming after her. It's a crazy, insane comic, and I love it.
Sold me on it, man. That sounds nuts.
This sounds like a no bad ideas comic.
You know, this is like what Bandette is like when I tell people why I love working on Bandette, it's like we just take all the stuff we really, really dig and we shove it into one thing.
Yeah.
And that's what this sounds
And this
like.
book
Take
definitely
some cool
feels like
stuff
that.
and shove it into one place.
The art is very reminiscent of, like, I get a very Aeon Flux vibe off of it. It's kind of got that like nice flowy, almost like watercolory vibe to it. It has some great action in this comic. There's a real sense of motion to the art that I really enjoy. So yeah, Run, Love, Kill published by Image. Very
Nice.
very good.
Very cool. All right, so those are comics we think you should check out. I think that brings us to the end of the show. Colleen, is there anything you want to plug, or do you have online presence?
I'm at Colleen Coover on Twitter. I have ColleenCoover.net, which I update sporadically.
Okay.
If you like digital comics, please buy Bandette. It's $1 an issue. Come on.
Yeah.
There's only 11 issues so far. I'm working on number 12. You can buy the entire story for $11.
It's pretty good, yeah.
And if you don't like digital comics, then get the hardcover. They're cheap too.
Because those are also gorgeous.
They're also gorgeous, and they have lots of extra stuff. So if you can do both.
Very cool. Of course, you can find us. We are at Panel on Panels on Twitter. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. Those are the other ones. Pinterest. Is that a thing?
Yeah,
I don't know.
it is still a thing.
And of course, you can email us, panelandpanels@gmail.com.
Please do.
Yeah, we'd
go
love to
for
hear
it.
from you guys.
Yeah, go for it. And of course, rate and review us on iTunes. Is that it? I don't know. I would feel like I get halfway through that list, and I'm like, did I hit everything?
Someday we're going to add more things just to throw you off.
Yeah, I know. You're going to start making up social media platforms for me to
We
mention.
didn't already?
I still don't know if Pinterest is a thing.
You're not on Quipster?
No, what's Webster?
It's where you just put quips out there.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. John,
cool.
you've got a big following on Quipster.
Really?
Yeah, we've been
wow.
posting for you.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, guys.
You're very welcome.
You've
Cool.
achieved the rank of Quipmeister.
Great.
In 2 states.
Just in two. Wow, this is state by state. All right, that bit
Oregon
came
and
out.
Vermont.
Oh, wow. Jeez, you guys. Of course, we want to thank Colleen Coover for putting up with us, and now
Yes.
from the sound of it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. Thank you
this
so
is
much.
awesome. So I think for all that's left to say is for Panel on Panels this week, I've been John Campbell.
I am currently Mike Gergoni.
And I will always be Donovan Eiler.
Keep reading comics, everybody.